The day Ma Gray finally gave birth to Dee, her happiness knew no bounds. After 10 long years of waiting, it felt like fate had answered her prayers at last. Her mother-in-law, Mama Tell, would no longer have any reason to taunt her or label her with cruel names. To Ma Gray, Dee was her entire world. Everything she had ever dreamed of and more. She vowed to do whatever it took to ensure his happiness, for he was her firstborn and the miracle that silenced her critics. On the day Ma Gray arrived home from the hospital, she called together all her household staff and issued a stern warning. Listen carefully. As you can see, I am not joking around. Be extremely cautious when taking care of my son. Don't touch him or reprimand him if he does anything wrong. Let me handle it. I'll bring him up however I see fit. It didn't take long before Ma Gray began firing any staff member who mishandled Dee's belongings. She adored him so much that she couldn't tolerate even the slightest mistake. As Dee grew older, he became incredibly attached to Ma Gray, who was nearly always by his side. His father, Harry, was often away from home, working tirelessly to provide for the family. By the time Dee turned 3, Ma Gray noticed he was unusually clingy. Rather than playing with other kids in the compound, he trailed after her, tugging at her clothes and begging for her attention. If she dared to sit with Harry and laugh at one of his jokes, Dee would stomp his feet, wave his toys around and shout, "Mommy, come back!" Harry often scolded him for this, but Ma Gray would intervene. "He's just a child. Stop scolding him," she'd say. "Ma Gray, you're encouraging this behavior. He's not a baby anymore. He needs to learn independence," Harry retorted. But Ma Gray brushed him off, smiling. "He just loves me. Don't be jealous," she teased. Harry shook his head. A chick that stays under its mother's wings too long forgets how to fly. Let the boy grow. Ma Gray ignored Harry's advice and continued showering her son with affection that puzzled even her husband. She went to extreme lengths to please Dee, no matter how questionable those actions might have been. "All I want is for my son to be happy," she'd say. While most mothers urge their children to stand on their own, Ma Gray held Dee tight, refusing to let him go. One day, after Ma Gray finished her bath, she walked into the bedroom to find Dee playing on the bed with his tablet. Ma Gray wasn't wearing any clothes at the time, and it never crossed her mind that Dee might notice anything inappropriate. "Hello, my love. How are you today?" she asked, smiling. Dee put down his tablet, his eyes drawn to his mother's bare chest. "Mommy, what are these?" he asked, pointing at her breasts. Ma Gray laughed softly. "Do you like them?" she asked, and Dee nodded innocently. She did nothing to stop him from touching her. On another evening, as Ma Gray sat on her bed playing with her son, the housemaid entered to take Dee for a bath. The moment Dee spotted the maid, he wailed and clung to Ma Gray. "Mommy, I don't want her. She hurts me when she bathes me," he cried. Without waiting to verify his claim, Ma Gray fired the maid on the spot. "Madam, he's lying. I would never do such a thing." The maid pleaded. "How dare you call my son a liar?" Ma Gray shouted. "Did I not warn you to be gentle with him? Get out. I don't ever want to see you again." That night, Ma Gray took full charge of bathing Dee herself. Day by day, their bond became more intense, far more than the usual closeness of mother and son. They spent all their time together, did everything together, and even shared the same bed whenever Harry was away. Eventually, Dee insisted on showering with Ma Gray. She gave in without a second thought, welcoming him into the bathroom with open arms. From then on, it became routine. They took showers together and dressed side by side, living more like spouses than mother and son. What Ma Gray failed to realize was that such unchecked love can spiral into something disastrous. Time passed, and Dee began to display strange behavior. He frequently pointed at Ma Gray's body, asking endless questions. She never considered telling him no. She believed he was just being smart and inquisitive. One afternoon, Ma Gray's mother, Mama Renee, came to visit. The older woman immediately sensed that something was off between her daughter and grandson. "What is going on here?" she demanded. "You shower with Dee? Do you realize what that can lead to?" "Mama, he's just a child. He doesn't know the difference between right and wrong," Ma Gray replied. "You're spoiling him, Ma Gray. This is so wrong. Stop before you regret it," Mama Renee warned. From the living room, Harry chimed in. "Tell her, Mama, I'm tired of repeating myself." By the time Dee reached 15, the once harmless attachment had turned sinister. He was no longer the shy boy hiding behind his mother. He became bold, aggressive, and territorial, especially when it came to Ma Gray. His teachers complained of his disrespect toward male staff, challenging their authority and even fighting them. "He's just strong-willed," Ma Gray would say whenever confronted with these reports. She dismissed them without much thought. That was only the tip of the iceberg. Dee developed a habit of accompanying Ma Gray wherever she went. Whether she visited the store or attended private meetings, he insisted on tagging along, glaring at anyone who dared talk to her for too long. One afternoon, their neighbor, Mr. Bellow, cheerfully remarked, "Ah, what a lovely mother and son." Dee froze, his face darkening. He lunged at Mr. Bellow, shoving him against the wall. "Don't ever speak to her like that again," he yelled. Harry dashed outside and pulled Dee away. "What is wrong with you?" He screamed, but Dee said nothing, just clenched his fist in anger. That evening, Harry confronted Ma Gray. "Can you see it now? Our son is behaving like a jealous husband, not a child. He's just being protective of me. You're making too big a deal out of it," Ma Gray argued. "It is a big deal." Harry shot back, slamming his hand on the table. "He needs discipline, and you need to stop enabling him." But Ma Gray turned a blind eye, lavishing even more affection on Dee. When he brought her flowers and called her his queen, she laughed and praised him for being thoughtful. Harry watched in silence, feeling powerless as his warnings went ignored. Before long, he decided to put his foot down and assert his role as head of the household. "I can't just stand by anymore. I'm not jealous of their closeness, but I don't understand their extreme affection for each other. They even kiss and shower together. This is unacceptable." Harry introduced strict rules, forbidding Dee from following Ma Gray everywhere. He insisted that Dee spend more time with his peers. Yet every time Harry enforced these rules, Ma Gray intervened, reversing them. For the first time in his life, Harry felt utterly defeated. Then, one afternoon, Ma Gray was in the living room sorting laundry when Dee walked in, clutching a notebook. His demeanor was tense and guarded. He quickly slipped the notebook into his backpack. "Dee, what's that?" Ma Gray asked casually. "Nothing, Mom. Just school stuff," he replied. Although she was suspicious, she let it slide. Some days later, while tidying Dee's room, Ma Gray came across the notebook. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it. To her horror, she found page after page of obsessive words about her. "My queen," one page read in bold letters, "no one will take her from me. I'll get rid of my father someday, so I can spend my life with my queen." Shaking, Ma Gray closed the notebook, trying to convince herself it was just a phase, a childish obsession. But a small voice within whispered that something was terribly wrong. Her fears proved justified one fateful evening. Ma Gray was preparing dinner in the kitchen while Harry sat at the dining table, flipping through a magazine. Dee was uncommonly quiet, staring at his mother in an unsettling way. "Dee, are you okay?" Ma Gray asked, wiping her hands on a towel and sitting next to him. He looked at her with eyes full of longing. "Mom, I need to tell you something I've hidden for a long time," he said softly. Ma Gray's heart raced. "Go ahead," she urged. He hesitated, then burst out, "I love you, Mom. I really love you. Not the way a son loves a mother, but more. You're the only woman I've ever wanted. I don't need anyone else." Ma Gray jumped up, her whole body trembling. What are you saying?" Before she could move away, Dee grabbed her arm. You don't understand. We belong together. You're mine. Let me go. Maigret cried, managing to wrest free from his grip. Her mind whirled, recalling the disturbing notebook entries. The reality was much worse than she'd feared. Frantic, she grabbed her phone and called Harry. "Come home now," she screamed. "It's Dee. Something is very wrong." Dee's demeanor instantly shifted to rage. He slammed his fist on the table. "Why are you calling him?" he demanded. "He'll never understand us. He wants to keep us apart." Maigret tried to back away, but Dee blocked her path. Moments later, Harry burst through the door. "What's going on?" he yelled. Before Maigret could reply, Dee lunged at his father. "She doesn't need you. She's mine," Dee roared. After a fierce struggle, Harry overpowered him. Maigret stood paralyzed, tears streaming down her face as the gravity of her mistakes dawned on her. She realized her misguided love had given rise to an uncontrollable darkness. Following the incident, Harry unleashed his pent-up anger. "This is your fault, Maigret. I warned you again and again, but you wouldn't listen. Look what you've done to him. Look what you've done to us." Maigret, overwhelmed by guilt and shame, sank into the couch in silence. She knew she had erred, but the pain of admitting it was unbearable. The next day, she confided in her mother, Mama Renee, who insisted they take Dee to a pastor for deliverance. Harry opposed the idea, suggesting therapy instead, but Mama Renee was determined to try the church first. Pastor Toby took one look at Dee and proclaimed, "This child is afflicted. A spirit from his spiritual mother has trapped him. We need 500,000 deposited immediately, or else you'll face grave consequences." Without hesitation, Maigret transferred the money to the church's account. Pastor Toby began chanting and calling upon spirits from water, fire, and earth, but Dee merely glared at him with growing fury. Suddenly, he lunged at Pastor Toby, ripping the preacher's robe. Security officers rushed in to remove Dee from the church. That was only the beginning. Maigret and Mama Renee visited one pastor after another in the hopes of exorcising Dee's demons, but with every attempt, Dee's behavior worsened. Eventually, he moved all his belongings into Maigret's room, insisting on staying there with her. "My son, why are you behaving like this?" she pleaded. "I'm your mother. You can't have me in that way. It's forbidden." "Mom, if I can't have you, then nobody will. The more you drag me to these churches, the more I despise you. Don't push me," he snarled, stalking out. Maigret was speechless. She couldn't believe how far things had gone. "If I'd known, I would never have exposed my body to him. I would never have showered with him or undressed in front of him," she sobbed. "Please, save my son. Don't let him go astray." That night she couldn't sleep, consumed by guilt. She thought about sending him to boarding school, but she knew he would refuse to go. Her worst fears came true one evening when Dee tried to force himself on her. She screamed and fled the house. Luckily, Harry arrived just in time. Outraged, he called the police, and Dee was taken into custody, despite knowing her son's actions were indefensible. Maigret felt a stab of regret as she watched her only child locked away. She spent a sleepless night, reflecting on her mistakes, wishing she could turn back the clock. The following day, without telling Harry, she went to the police station and bailed Dee out. When Dee walked out, his shirt draped over his shoulder, Maigret's heart broke at the sight. "My son, I'm sorry for everything. It's all my fault. I should have been a better mother. I never should have let you spend a night in that horrible cell. Please forgive me," she pleaded. "Mom, enough. I still love you, despite everything. It just hurts that you don't feel the same way," he said. "But I'll learn to live with it. Let's go home." The drive back was quiet and emotional. Dee sat in the back seat, plotting his next move. "I should push harder. I won't give up," he murmured to himself. When they got home, Dee stepped out of the car and gazed up at the house that no longer felt like home. It was a prison, and not just for him. His parents would soon learn that they were trapped too. Inside, he called both Ma Gray and Harry together. "Mom, Dad, I just want to apologize for everything. It suddenly hit me how wrong I've been. How could I imagine being with my own mother? That's unthinkable. Please, find it in your hearts to forgive me." Tears welled in Ma Gray's eyes. She rushed over to embrace him. "Oh, my son, God has answered my prayers. I knew you'd turn around," she said. Dee flinched slightly but hugged her back, forcing a small smile. "Yes, Mom. Everything will be okay," he said. But behind the mask of remorse, he was hatching a sinister plan. That night, Dee tossed and turned in bed, haunted by the memory of being dragged away by the police. "They'll pay for this," he whispered. "They'll all pay." From that moment, Dee put on the show of a perfect son. He woke early, swept the yard, greeted neighbors politely, and even helped Ma Gray in the kitchen. He claimed to be attending therapy sessions, coming home with stories of his progress. "Therapy is really helping me," he told Ma Gray one evening as he set the dining table. "I'm realizing how much I need to own up to my mistakes." Ma Gray's heart soared. "That's my boy. I always knew you'd change," she said, smiling proudly. However, Harry was not fooled by Dee's sudden transformation. He observed him closely, noticing every calculated word and action. "People don't just change overnight," Harry muttered, suspicious. One Saturday morning, Dee volunteered to wash Harry's car, an offer he had never made before. "I'll help you, Dad," he said, grabbing a sponge. Harry watched him warily. "Why are you doing this now?" he asked. Dee paused and faced his father calmly. "Because I want to fix what I've broken," he said. But as he spoke, he was reminded of the past. Showering with Ma Gray, how Harry tried to separate them, and the bitterness he still harbored. Harry narrowed his eyes. "We'll see," he muttered, heading inside. The next day, Dee drove to see Marty, his supposed therapist, but in truth, his therapy sessions were lessons on how to exact revenge on his parents. He had met Marty a month earlier while wandering through a rough neighborhood. Dee boldly approached a group of men smoking and drinking. One man, Marty, took particular interest in him. Initially, Dee pleaded with Marty to let him join their group, revealing his family problems in tears. Marty was intrigued by how easily Dee was willing to hand over money. He demanded a membership fee of $500,000. Dee paid without a second thought. "Smart move," Marty praised him. From that day on, Dee lied to his parents about going to therapy. Instead, he joined Marty's gang, participating in pickpocketing and other crimes. Within a month, Dee developed a hardened persona, the backbone he needed to strike back at his family. First, he orchestrated a mugging of Ma Gray on her way home from the supermarket. The gang stole a significant sum of money and beat her mercilessly. When Ma Gray returned home, bruised all over, Dee feigned surprise and rushed her to the hospital, footing all the bills. Despite his outward concern, he felt a thrill of satisfaction inside. "This is just the beginning," he muttered. Next, he targeted his father, though he planned to be methodical about it. Valentine's Day was a turning point. Dee prepared breakfast for Ma Gray, waiting until Harry had left for work. "Mom, please get up and eat," he said, carrying a tray into her room. Still weak from her injuries, Ma Gray sat up slowly. "Thank you, my son," she whispered. Unbeknownst to her, the meal was laced with sleeping pills. Within minutes, she was out cold. Dee called in his gang members, and they slipped into Ma Gray's room while Dee stood in the corner, recording the assault on his phone. Unconscious, Ma Gray was unable to sense or resist what was happening. After it ended, Dee sent the disturbing video to Harry from a fake phone number. On seeing it, Harry raced home, furious and heartbroken. "So this is what you do behind my back," he raged. Ma Gray, who had just awakened, was bewildered. I don't understand what you're talking about. I haven't done anything." Harry shoved his phone in her face and played the video. Maugrey's eyes went wide with horror, watching herself being violated by multiple men. "Harry, no! This has to be a setup. I'd never do that," she cried in desperation. No matter what Maugrey said, Harry refused to believe her. He stormed out of the house, spending the night at a friend's. Maugrey tried to recall the details of that afternoon, but her memory was a blank. She remembered only eating the food Dee had brought, then waking up feeling sore. She'd assumed it was just another recurring infection, never imagining something so monstrous had happened. For Dee, this was still not enough. He had further plans for both Maugrey and Harry. The final blow for his mother came soon afterward. Trying to be the dutiful son again, Dee offered to look after Maugrey at home. "Mom, I know none of this is really your fault. I know you're innocent. Just make sure you don't cross me again," he warned. "What does that mean?" Maugrey asked, alarmed. "You heard me, Mom. Don't get in my way, or worse things might happen." It suddenly clicked for Maugrey that Dee was behind everything. Tears fell down her cheeks. "Dee, so you did all this?" He nodded. "Yes, Mom. I arranged that attack at the supermarket. Did you think I'd ever forgive you for choosing Dad over me? You let me rot in a cell. I'll never forget it. But I thought you'd change. I thought you forgave me," she sobbed. "That was part of my game, Mom." Dee smirked. "And now, that meal you just ate will be your last. You're going to suffer like I did." Terrified, Maugrey fumbled for her phone to call Harry, begging him to come home. Dee allowed it because it fit perfectly into his plan. Within moments, she started writhing in agony from severe stomach pains. She screamed for help, but Dee pinned her to the bed and forced himself on her. Maugrey cried out, but no one came. After 5 minutes, she lay still, life slipping away. Dee stepped back, realizing she was gone. His first objective was complete. He waited for Harry, who soon arrived to a horrifying scene. Panicked, Harry called the police, but before he could explain, Dee ambushed him, unleashing a brutal beating before shooting him and stabbing him repeatedly. In a final rush of panic, Dee covered the bodies and fled just moments before the police arrived. But as he made his getaway, a truck careened out of control and slammed into him. Dee died on the spot. This story shows how unrestrained love and the absence of boundaries can trigger devastating outcomes. A mother's love is nurturing and natural, but without clear limits, it can foster dependency, confusion, and destructive behavior. Furthermore, the tale warns us not to ignore early signs of alarming conduct or to dismiss well-meaning advice from loved ones. Doing so can escalate problems and lead to irreversible tragedy. Thank you for watching and stay safe.